You are listening to episode 5 of Digging Deeper. In Digging Deeper, we discover the truth behind the things that we perceive as truth or meaning. In these first few episodes, we focus specifically on Islam, its values, but also its shadows. And we invite you on this journey with us to learn and to understand how we can help our fellow Muslim friends to see the light. Welcome once again, and thanks for joining us on episode 5 of Digging Deeper. My name is David, and my friend with me in the studio is Raymond. And let me just tell you quickly that we are not paid to do this. We do this because we really have a love for people, a love for Christians, and we also love our Muslim friends. So we decided to do this podcast to give some information and shed some light on the differences between Islam and Christianity, but also to inform our Christian friends on how we can help our Muslim friends to see the light. Now, Raymond and I are actually an odd couple, odd colleagues. He's a full-blown Englishman, and I'm an Afrikaanse boertjie from the platteland, and I'm sure I'm sure you'll hear that in my accent and the way that I struggle to speak English, but that doesn't matter. Raymond, don't you just want to remind our listeners, why exactly are we passionate about this discussion?
David, from my point of view, in my time of doing Muslim evangelism, the body of Christ, or the church as a whole, are totally ignorant of what Islam is about and what its core values are and what its intention is in the world. And when you talk to other Christians about Muslims, they kind of close up. They don't want to know. They're scared of it. They don't want to interact. And I know when we've had a couple of sessions in Paul to get people together, you don't have a church filling up with them. You get a couple, 10, 20 people, which you kind of have to beg to come and listen to your talk. Where if you go on another topic, which everyone wants to talk about, the hall's full. There's not enough seats available. So, and it's very important to me because as far as I'm concerned, this is where the Great Commission hits the road, or the rubber hits the road, as I like to say. And clearly, Jesus told us to go out and spread the word. And there's 1.8 billion Muslims in the world who deny Jesus' death and resurrection. So they're totally lost. And that is where we need to be. And secondly, on top of that is God is changing the mission field. God is bringing the mission field to us. We don't have to go across borders into a Muslim majority country anymore because the Muslims are coming into our environment. We work with them. We play sport with them. And so it's a perfect opportunity for Christians to go and talk to them and just give a couple of pointers or, just engage in that dialogue.
I think we as Christians are not afraid of evangelism, but there's a big difference in evangelizing someone that does not already believe in something or someone versus doing evangelism with someone who already has their own faith and they need to let go of that first before they can believe in Jesus. And there's a big difference. And I think that's might be one of the things that disencourages Christians, because they first need to convince a Muslim that the way in which they believe are not correct or is not correct, and that the way that we as Christians believe is the better option, or actually the only option.
Yeah. But David, added to that, there are two things which happen when you talk to a Muslim. You either get the Muslim who's just the complacent, puwome, as I call the Christians, who really don't know much about their faith, and they're just quite happy to do what they're told to do. So there's not much of a discussion which can happen with them. And then there are the educated Muslims. And when you talk to an educated Muslim, he will throw Bible verses at you, just like Muhammad and Hussein did. Jesus only came for the Jews, and they rattle off 3 or 4 different Bible verses. And then a Christian who doesn't know them or doesn't know how to respond sit there rattling in his cage and going, oh, I can't talk to him. Where the answers are very, very simple and they're there.
And Prof van Eck helped us to
Correct.
realize
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
We are busy with a specific focus in this part of our podcast series, and we are currently focusing on the 5 pillars of faith. In our previous episode, we looked at the first pillar, which is the Shahada. And in this episode, we are focusing on the second pillar, which is the daily prayer. Now, one of the most demonstrated actions of Islam is prayer. And
Correct.
and
Yeah.
we as Christians experience that part of being a Muslim, I think, the most. And even if you look at buildings like airport buildings or malls, many of them, if not most of them, have a dedicated room for Muslim prayers. And I mean, they even close their shops between 1 and 2, especially on Fridays,
Yes.
for prayer.
Yes.
So obviously, uh, these 5 prayers that they need to do every day plays an important role in their life as well.
Very much so. Yeah.
So I thought that maybe we must look at about 5 things in this episode. First of all, I've got a few questions, and the questions that I have are as follows. Where do these 5 prayers come from? The second question that I have is, what exactly is being said in these 5 prayers? Other thing that I'm interested in is the fact that they face east when they do these prayers. I want to
Well,
ask
not
you
actually
about that.
east. They face Mecca. So
Mecca, where you are.
depending where you are in the world.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I want to ask you if they have any other prayers except for these 5 prayers that they have to do. And then I'd also like to know what the difference is between the way that Christians see prayer and Muslims see prayer. So,
Yeah,
do you
interesting
think that will
questions.
help us to cover the whole
Absolutely.
pillar?
I mean, you're asking a number of very important questions there, which we can unpack and dig deeper into what Islam actually believes when it comes to prayer.
So, the first question is, where does these 5 prayers come from? Can you maybe just tell me where in the Quran it's mentioned?
Well, David, the prayers aren't mentioned in the Quran whatsoever.
Not.
Not at all. You know, if we haven't looked, like we've made very clear up until now, is that the Quran is the word of Allah and it's perfect, and there's no change or no contradiction or no errors. There is no command in the Quran which tells Muslims to pray 5 times a day. Zero, not one.
That doesn't make sense to me because as I see Muslims and their faith, they've got to do exactly what the Quran tells them to do and nothing besides that. Now, where do these 5 prayers come from?
Well, remember, it's not only what the Quran told them to do, it's also what Muhammad did. So, as we saw in that statement of faith, it is there is no God but Allah and his final messenger.
Yes.
So, what Muhammad also did or taught is also considered tops. And that's where we get the 5 prayers of the day. And it comes from our hadith. The hadith can be found in Surah Bukhari, book number 59, hadith number 18. That is the in-book reference. There's 3 different references to
I'm
that.
going to stop you right there. I have another question that we haven't paid some attention to. We keep talking about the Quran and the Hadith.
Correct.
Just explain the difference once again to us.
Right. The Quran is actually, have a look at the Quran as the the Old Testament, or the laws, or what God tells you what to do and how to live, etc., etc. Where the Hadith, have a look at the New Testament and the red letter writing of Jesus. So the Hadith is what Muhammad actually said and taught.
So it's an expansion on the Quran.
It's an expansion on the Quran, yeah. So the Quran actually says you need to have the Hadith to be able to understand what is written in there and the explanation or interpretation of
Okay.
difficult verses. Yeah.
We had a question from one of our listeners just asking us to clear out the fact that we keep talking about surah, this and that and that. So just explain to us the structure of the Quran. How does that work? Do
Okay.
they have different chapters, different books?
Yeah, look, there's 114 different chapters in the Quran, or they chapters, which are called surahs. Each has got a name. Some would be called the cow or Johannes, meaning Joseph, etc.,
Okay.
or Miriam, Mary. Um, I don't know all of those. Muslims like to know all of them by name. And it's much easier to go Surah 19, which means chapter 19, and then verse is called ayat. So
So
you
they
go
only have
19, verse 17,
they
which
only have one book, which is the Quran, divided into chapters or surahs,
yeah,
and then verse numbers.
in verse numbers, yes.
Okay, thanks for clearing
Yeah.
that up. Let's get back to the question. You say that these five prayers actually then come from Muhammad.
They come from Muhammad, and it's called the whole hadith, and it's a long hadith, so we're not going to read it. I'll just summarize it for you, but you can find that in Surah Bukhari, book number 59, hadith number 18. And it's a whole story of the night journey. This is where Muhammad fell asleep. He was taken supernaturally out of his sleep, put onto a flying horse, went off to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, he gets off the horse and he gets taken up into heaven, and he meets all the prophets from Jesus all the way up to Moses. Um, and then he goes and he talks to Allah about prayers. And Allah tells him to pray 50 times a day. He then comes down and Moses asks him, what did Allah say? And he said, well, no, I got told to pray 50 times a day. And Moses goes, no, that's far too many. You better go negotiate it. So this whole negotiation happens. And between Muhammad, Moses, and Allah, they bring the prayers down to 5 prayers a day. And then Muhammad comes back and he jumps on his flying donkey and off he goes back to Mecca again. And that's where the 5 prayers a day comes from.
Okay, so it's not from the Quran, it's from the Hadith.
Yeah. But I want to mention here as well, we've got to also understand that Arabia, or especially Mecca, was a pagan city. They had 350, 360 different idols in the Kaaba at that stage. And that's the square box which Muslims walk around on their pilgrimage. And they used to pray 5 times a day as well. So
Interesting.
it's kind of, if you have a look at the history, it's kind of a
Please just don't use the word
it's
copy.
it's a kind of copy
Copy.
from pagan faiths, especially the Zoroastrians. So it's questionable again. Is this an adapted faith, or is it really from the true God of creation?
We're not saying anything. We just mentioned the word copy. Hey,
Yeah.
let our listeners read between the lines. Okay. Okay, now we've spoken about where these prayers come from, but now I want to know what are the contents of these prayers? Is it exactly the same? Are they instructed on what to say, when to say it?
No, the 5 prayers a day they're all different. All 5 prayers are different. They do follow a certain structure. Like, for example, Surah 1 is repeated at every prayer. In actual fact, it's repeated 17 times in the 5 prayers a day. And it's very important because if we want to talk about the actual prayers, verse 6 and 7 of Surah 1 is very important because that directly Muslims confirm the curse of Allah on the Christians and the Jews. So effectively, 17 times a day, Muslims are cursing Christians and Jews for believing in a different God than they believe in.
If you live near a mosque, you'll hear these prayers over the
It's the call
intercom.
for prayer. Yeah,
Is that just the call for prayer? That's not the prayer it's specific.
That's just the call for prayer, saying, "Hey, wake up, come to pray. It's time to pray." Yeah.
Okay. Why did they do it facing a specific direction?
Well, it's to face Mecca, and it's just purely to bring unity so that all Muslims are facing in the same place in terms of unity. It's got no special connotation other than that, than just facing everyone in the same place. But what is important here is if we have a look at the Jewish tradition of prayer, they also used to face Jerusalem. But the reason why they faced Jerusalem is when the tabernacle was built originally by Moses, that's where God came down and his presence was. He sat on the mercy seat and the clouds filled the temple. So they were facing Jerusalem and the temple because that's where God's presence is. Now you don't have that in Islam. You have only the tradition which says that um, Abram and Isaac or Ishmael built the Kaaba, and that's it, which is also very questionable because if you read the hadiths on that, it doesn't go back 4,000 years to when Abram and Ishmael were alive. It only goes back to just before Islam was established. So it's a bit of a technical blups there.
I hear what you're saying about the Jews also facing the temple, but we understand the roots of that. They
Correct.
saw the temple literally as the house of God.
Correct.
But we also know that Jesus came and he demonstrated or explained or proven that God's wat is teenwoordigheid,
Presence, yeah.
is actually universal. It's
Yes.
not contained. Okay,
Yes.
so Jesus made an adjustment towards the truth, what it
Yeah.
what it actually is, and He sent His Holy Spirit.
But-
so now we know that all of us house the Spirit of God.
But David, that's very interesting because if we go back to what Muhammad was saying, that they follow Jesus as a prophet with his teachings if it confirms with the Quran. Now remember, Jesus' disciples asked him, Lord, how do we pray? Teach us how to pray. And what did Jesus do? He said, sit down quietly, go to your a secret place and pray the Lord's Prayer, our Father in heaven.
In heaven.
Yeah.
That's the location He gives.
Yeah,
in
you know,
heaven.
so
Yeah.
so you've got the teaching from Jesus, which isn't again carried through into Islam.
Yeah.
It's another thing which is fabricated and paid 5 times a day, not in secret, you know, publicly on the streets, as you've mentioned, and all the rest of it, just like the hypocritic Jews used to do,
Yeah.
which Jesus said, don't pray like them. They're hypocrites.
Obviously, Muslims will never say that they exercise their faith as the pagans used to do it. But
Absolutely
you know, the
not.
pagans, many of them had a physical structure or a physical thing, something that you can touch,
Yes, yeah.
like a
An idol
statue or
exactly,
idol,
yeah.
something man-made
Yes.
to which they prayed.
Yeah.
And they also faced. So what's the difference then between praying towards the what do you call it in Mecca?
The Kaaba,
The Kaaba.
the square box. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the difference then between praying towards that and the way the pagans used to do
Well,
it?
you're actually asking a couple of questions on top of each other. Yeah. So just for clarity, let's just go back and just remind our listeners that the direction of prayer wasn't always to the Kaaba. It originally was to Jerusalem, just like the Jews did,
Yeah.
where the presence of God was. But what happened in the history of Islam, and just quickly, after the revelation started, Muhammad spent 13 years in Mecca. Then, because of trouble, he moved to Medina, where he got his power and started his army. And then, because the Jews weren't converting to Islam, he changed the direction of prayer to Mecca.
Mm.
Now, it's very important here. What happens is this is 6 to 8 years before he conquers Mecca. So what have you got? You've got the Muslims or the new Muslims praying towards Mecca and the Kaaba, which houses 360 idols.
Mm.
So they're praying to idols. And then later, Muhammad goes and he conquers Mecca and he destroys all the idols except one, which is the black stone.
Mm.
And that today is still embedded in the side of the Kaaba. So when Muslims pray, what are they doing? They're still bowing down to an idol. Now remember, when we just spoke about the statement of faith, Allah has no partners. You're not allowed to. Any association to any partner or anything related to him, idol worship or anything, is not allowed. And what happens? We got Muslims facing the Kaaba and an idol, which used to be in the pagan times. But over and above that, in the hadith, we've got Muhammad kissing the black stone. And now on the pilgrimage, you have all the Muslims going, walking past and kissing, copying what Muhammad did, because that's what we need to do. We've got the book and the man, so the man did that, and we got to do that too. But not only that, in the hadith, it also says that Muhammad pointed to the black stone and he said, Allah Akbar, God is greatest. So he's claiming that the black stone is God or
Or at
Allah,
least containing him.
or containing him. Yeah.
Okay, but according to them, where is Allah?
Well, he's above his throne,
Where is that?
somewhere in heaven. He doesn't even sit on his throne, he's above his throne. And they don't question it, they just go because he's the all knowing and he knows better. So he doesn't interact. There's only the one way relationship which we're talking about. So,
I think we'll call that a oopsie.
an oopsie.
Yeah. The next question that I have is do Muslims pray other prayers beside these 5 prayers?
Yeah, Muslims are generally encouraged to pray if they need it, but not really. They kind of pray their prayers and they say their shahada when they need it, and that's basically it.
Comes back to that non-personal relationship that they don't
Correct.
have.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the difference then between prayer in Christianity versus prayer in Islam?
Well, praying Christianity is a very private, personal scenario where you exposing your heart and your intentions and asking for guidance, especially on the evangelism side. You've got the laying of hands of people, and you pray for the sick, you pray for healing, you pray for blessings, and you see Yahweh and Jesus interacting with those prayers and healing people, and giving the blessings. So you have that two-way communication where in Islam it's just a ritual of ablutions, praying, etc., and nothing more.
Raymond, speaking of rituals, don't Muslims have many rituals revolving around their prayers?
Yes, absolutely, David. There are many rituals involved, and if you go to a mosque, especially on a Friday, first of all, you have to remove your shoes because it's holy ground, as what happened in the Bible with Moses. And then there's a whole washing system which they go through, washing their hands and their face and their feet before they do their prayers. But the rituals don't stop there. Rituals carry on throughout their whole life. And just one thing which I'd like to add is even going to the toilet is a ritual thing, because Muslims believe that Satan lives in the toilet. So there's a way to walk into the toilet, walk out the toilet, ablutions again after the toilet and before. So it's possibly another whole topic we can discuss about Islamic rituals.
Raymond, while we're recording the past few episodes, I think I had a shift in my mind about Islam and Muslims. I saw them as violent people just wanting to get rid of Christians, not wanting to communicate with Christians. And somehow I started seeing the softer side of Muslims, which I'm happy about, but now I'm a bit worried. You mentioned that one of the things that they say in their prayers 17 times a day is actually negativity towards Christians. So
Absolutely, yeah.
that's not okay.
No, it's not okay. And remember that, if you have a look at Surah 9, verse 5, for example, it's a big call for Islams to kill all the non-believers. In other words, non-Muslims must be killed. Surah 9:29 says the same thing. The whole of Surah 9 is all about destroying everything. And that's the aim of Islam, to overtake the world until everyone believes in Allah. And that is when peace is attained.
What type of God asks his children to do that?
Yeah, well, that's a question. And we're coming back to who is Allah again, because this is not that. But if you have a look at the history again, and you have a look at the first 13 years of Muhammad, which was the peaceful revelations, where he's trying to get the pagans in Mecca to follow him and listen to him, and he only had a handful um, of followers when he went to Medina. When he gets to Medina, he gets the political power, and what happens? Through force, he's getting the the acceptance. And one thing which a lot of people and even Muslims don't understand or know that for the majority of the 23 years of the revelation of the Quran, which Muhammad had before he died, his home tribe, the Qurayshi tribe, didn't follow him. They rejected him and tried to kill him. It was only in the last 3 years that they come to the faith after he'd overtaken Mecca, did they come to the faith and accept Islam.
If I think about Muslims praying, I see them head against the ground.
Yeah, no, they climb onto their little mat, lay their mat out in the correct direction, and go through a whole ritual of bending, going, bumping their heads on the floor.
Why?
It's what they call prostration, and they get that. They claim they get it from the Bible.
From the Bible?
From the Bible, yeah, absolutely. And this is why I question the fact Jesus taught how to pray, but they go and they say when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he threw himself on the ground and prayed. So that's prostration. And you can go and you can have a look at verses.
Okay, but wait a bit. Does the Quran also say they must do that?
No.
Okay.
No,
so,
it all comes from the hadith again, this whole thing of prostration.
Okay, but wait. Muhammad said they will do as Jesus instructs as long as it's confirmed in the Quran.
Yeah. Correct.
So them praying like this is not in the Quran.
It's not in the Quran, no.
But Jesus said.
Yeah. But again, Muhammad takes preference over Jesus because he's the prophet for this time. Jesus was a prophet for that time. So the Lord's Prayer is only for the Jews 2,000 years ago and no one else. And now you get the 5 prayers per day.
Okay.
That's technical, and that's where the Muslim will take that to. But still, I mean, even if you follow these, even if you go, I mean, and Muhammad, we've had this discussion before, and especially with the saint, they got, in actual fact, they've got a chart in their office of all the biblical verses of where prostration is, even Moses prostrating before the Lord, etc., etc. And if you have a look at all of those are because you're in the presence of God and you're falling down because you can't. Your sinful nature cannot be in his presence. And they claiming that is prostration. So let's have a look at the prayers, what happens when you go to a mosque. And I've been to a mosque. I don't see any Muslim throwing himself on the ground like Jesus throwing himself on the ground in anguish. You know, so there's no balance in what I'm saying or what I see. It's the Islamic gymnastics, which I call, where it interweaves a little bit of deception and a little bit of truth. You know what I mean? To kind of make up this, sure, we pray nicely and you know what I mean? Just like Jesus said, but never is the Lord's Prayer ever mentioned. So I don't know where they get it from.
It's very selective faith, eh?
Yeah. If they pray in prostration like Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane just before his death, but not following the Lord's Prayer, it doesn't balance again. You see the selectiveness and the choosing. So prostration can't come from the Bible because that was for the people at that time. But no, that's what they claim.
The thing is just if you pray like Jesus did in the garden, or you look at Luke 8 where Jairus, what's his name in English? I'm not sure. Luke 8 verse 40 to 56, where his daughter is dying and he comes to Jesus and what does he do? He falls on the ground.
Yes, yeah.
So before you fall with your face to the ground in prayer, there's something happening in your heart or your mind or your emotions that forces you to humble yourself before God. Yeah. And I don't
it's
see
a
that
contrite heart where you're saying, oh, please help me. I'm stuck. I've got nowhere else to go. Lord, help me.
I didn't see that with them praying.
And what happens in that? Look at the spiritual value of that. Jesus prays for that child and the child is healed. to the spiritual world, not through. And that's the beauty about the Christian prayer, where the Islamic prayer, you have to be there and you have to face a certain direction, etc., etc.
Because you were being told to do it.
Because you've been told to do it. And they don't see the true value of that, that pure heart making a request to God and God blessing and following that.
Just
that
following the
request.
recipe.
Just follow the recipe. Yeah.
And if the recipe says it's going to taste nice, then
Yeah.
when you eat your food after you made it from the recipe, you also just say it tastes nice because the recipe says
Because
it tastes nice.
yeah, that's right.
But
and
in the
everyone else
meantime,
says it
it's-
tastes nice, so it's got to taste.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you're disgusted by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why you get the two halves of Muslims,
Yeah.
which are the devout Muslims and other which just follow because it's too hard to leave.
I once heard, and I don't know if it's true, maybe you can help me, that Allah actually prayed for Muhammad.
Yes, quite correct, David. That is true. That is found in 3 verses in the Quran. The one is 8:30. That's Surah 8, verse 30, where Allah prays for Muhammad. So the big question here is, and it offers a big debate with Muslims, is who is Allah actually praying to? And if he's the one God and the uncreated God, he's got no one to pray to. So it's a very big dilemma which Islam has.
I think this concludes our focus on the prayers.
Yeah, I don't have much more I can say. Unless we got get some comments from people,
Yeah,
and we can dig into it a little bit deeper.
that's exactly what we want to do. Tell me in
Absolutely.
our next episode.
We are going to have a look at almsgiving, and almsgiving is just basically giving to the poor, etc. And Islam specifically defines 2.5% of a person's income, which needs to go to the poor and to help people, versus the Christians' worth of giving to the poor and looking after the elderly and the sick.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it will be interesting.
We've reached the end of this episode. If you want to support us, please go to www.patreon.com/diggingdeepersa, and that will enable us to do more recordings like this and keep you informed of the things that you need to know as a Christian with regards to many things, but also Islam. Thanks again, Douglas.
Thanks, David. And just let me just add, if anyone else out there wants backup or support, which I've said, we've got all the references, all the Quran verses, all the hadiths. So if they want that kind of assistance, we can give that information.
Wonderful. Until next time, take care.